Your lecturer is Beth Cabrera. Dr. Cabrera is a senior scholar at the Center for the Advancement of Well-Being at George Mason University, where she conducts research on applying principles of positive psychology to improve personal and professional well-being. She received her PhD in Industrial Organizational Psychology from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Dr. Cabrera's research has been published in leading academic and professional journals, and she is the author of the book Beyond Happy: Women, Work, and Well-Being.
When you think of a thriving business, how do you imagine it achieved its success? Was it the strategy, marketing, innovation, or operating efficiency? Maybe it was the customer experience. Clearly, all of these initiatives can impact the success of a business, but they're not the most important factor. Businesses thrive when their people are thriving. People choose the strategic direction. People design marketing campaigns. People develop new products and processes, and people deliver the customer experience. Employees are the key to creating long-term value. Companies are beginning to realize that the next competitive frontier in business success is employee experience. The experiences that employees have in the workplace shape their engagement and success. Organizations that focus on employee experience are able to attract and retain top talent. Research by Jacob Morgan, who wrote The Employee Experience Advantage, shows that companies with the strongest focus on employee experience are significantly more likely to be ranked among the best places to work and among the most innovative companies. They're also found in the American Customer Satisfaction Index twice as often, and their profit is 4 times the average. Sir Richard Branson was an early adopter of this focus on employee experience. He's famously said that clients do not come first. Employees come first. If you take care of your employees, they'll take care of the clients. His Virgin companies prioritize employees first, customers second, and shareholders third. Branson believes if you do that, shareholders will do well, the customers do better, and employees are happy. And he's right. It's clear that employee experience matters, but it can be hard to define. Companies know that dissatisfied employees are less likely to stay, resulting in turnover costs associated with losses in knowledge and experience and the training of new hires. So many businesses have invested significant resources on surveys to gauge employee satisfaction and have taken steps to address weaknesses in areas like pay and working conditions. That's a good thing, but it's not enough. Some companies have moved beyond satisfaction to look at employee engagement. Engagement focuses on behaviors related to effort and productivity. Now, this is certainly an important aspect of the employee experience, but it's still pretty narrow in scope. In 2016, IBM and Globoforce developed an Employee Experience Index designed to provide a more comprehensive assessment of factors that shape the employee experience. They isolated 5 measures: belonging, purpose, achievement, happiness, and vigor. In their study using these measures, they found that higher scores on these indices were associated with greater discretionary effort, higher quality work performance, and lower turnover intention. In this course, we will look closely at these aspects of employee experience, plus some others that may surprise you. Drawing on insights from the field of positive psychology, we will consider a number of components of the employee experience that combine to create a workplace in which employees are thriving, both personally and professionally. Thriving employees are satisfied. Thriving employees are engaged. But thriving employees are also actively seeking ways to improve both themselves and their organizations. And this can be transformative for a business. Let's start by thinking about what thriving is. Now, everyone will have a different answer to this question, but there will be similarities. You may equate thriving with feeling good or functioning well. Or perhaps it's a sense of vitality and fulfillment, feeling truly happy, or being satisfied with your life. The standard dictionary definition is prospering, flourishing, or developing well. There are many different formulations, but at the heart of every definition of thriving is the idea of well-being. So the question now becomes, what's well-being? While we all have an intuitive sense of this concept, it's actually quite complicated. So much so that an entire field of psychology has recently developed to define, measure, and promote it. Since much of what we'll cover in the upcoming lectures draws from this body of work, let's take a minute to look at positive psychology, how it came about, what it's discovering about the ways in which we thrive. In the decades following World War II, the science of psychology made significant advances in diagnosing and treating pathologies. The focus on mental illness and adversity enriched our understanding of the causes of human suffering. But we didn't learn much about the other side of the human experience, thriving. Psychologists knew a lot more about how to help people with depression or anxiety than they did about how to help people live well and be their best. A few psychologists did study the positive side of life. Abraham Maslow was interested in how people fulfill their potential. Donald Clifton explored the psychology of strengths, asking what will happen when we think about what's right with people rather than fixating on what's wrong with them. But these psychologists were the exception. In 1998, Martin Seligman was the president of the American Psychological Association. He believed the absence of mental illness did not imply the presence of mental wellness. Not being depressed isn't the same thing as having a life so full of vitality, joy, and meaning that you can't wait to jump out of bed in the morning. And likewise, the absence of performance problems at work isn't the same as achieving optimal performance. So Seligman urged more psychologists to shift their focus from relieving misery to exploring what makes life worth living. He encouraged them to study the conditions that enable people to thrive and began bringing together researchers who were working on human strengths and positive attributes. Since then, there's been an explosion of research on topics including happiness, gratitude, optimism, strengths, flow, meaning, and relationships. Now, to be clear, positive psychology is not about how to be happy all the time, or how to avoid setbacks, failure, or disappointment. It's not about ignoring reality. Rather, it's about providing the tools to better deal with it. Now, of course, positive psychologists were not the first people to show interest in the concept of well-being and how to achieve it. Long before Maslow and Clifton, the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle sought to understand the good life. He explored topics like happiness, concluding that happiness depends on ourselves, and meaning in life, asking what's the ultimate purpose of human existence. What is new is that the field of positive psychology brings a scientific understanding to many of these concepts. Researchers use the scientific method, testing ideas, obtaining evidence, and applying statistical analyses to determine the factors and circumstances that enable thriving. In doing this research, scientists focus on different aspects of well-being. Some work to identify the factors that impact it. Others investigate the consequences of well-being. How does having high well-being help us? And others test different interventions to determine the best ways to enhance our well-being. Here are some of the things we've learned so far. Well-being can be defined as a mental state characterized by positive feelings and positive functioning. When we're thriving, when we have high well-being, we're at our best. We're happy, healthy, and prosperous. At work, we're more creative, more productive, and more engaged. Students who are thriving get higher grades, are less depressed, and more likely to stay in school. Well-being doesn't just make us feel good, it's also positively related to our health. It can protect us from getting a cold, and reduces the likelihood of developing cardiovascular disease and possibly even cancer. We've also learned that well-being isn't a single dimension. There are many factors that influence our well-being. Aristotle was the first to distinguish two separate dimensions of well-being, hedonia and eudaimonia. Hedonia means feeling good or pleasure. It involves things and activities that result in positive emotions. Hedonia is what most of us think of as happiness. Eudaimonia is the Greek word for human flourishing. It's about doing good or living up to one's potential by making meaningful contributions. Many scholars today would agree that well-being comes from a combination of eudaimonia, engaging our strengths for a purpose greater than ourselves, and hedonia, frequently experiencing positive emotions. Yet most well-being theories encompass more than just these two dimensions. Ed Diener developed a tripartite model of subjective well-being, which includes frequent positive emotions, infrequent negative emotions, and a mental evaluation of being satisfied with your life. Martin Seligman's PERMA model includes 5 distinct elements: positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. Another well-being scholar, Carol Riff, has created a scale of psychological well-being that measures 6 facets: self-acceptance, environmental mastery, positive relations, purpose in life, personal growth, and autonomy. Tal Ben-Shahar taught a class on positive psychology at Harvard that was so popular it was one of Harvard's largest classes ever. His SPIRE model for what he refers to as whole being includes spiritual well-being, or finding significance and meaning in whatever you do, physical well-being, intellectual well-being, which he defines as deep engagement with texts, people, art, or nature, relational well-being, and emotional well-being. Richard Davidson is a neuroscientist who has identified 4 distinct neural circuits in our brains associated with higher levels of well-being. These include resilience, positive outlook, focused attention, and generosity. You'll notice that there's a good deal of overlap among these different well-being models. In this course, we'll take a more in-depth look at these and other factors that scientists have discovered are associated with well-being. Now, the increased interest in well-being over the last decade is not just scholarly. I'm sure you've noticed an explosion of popular interest in the topic of well-being as well. I believe there's a really good reason for it. Our world has changed pretty radically over the last few decades, but our minds have not evolved to live in this new world. Technological advances have improved our lives in countless ways. Yet technology has also contributed to frenetic, fast-paced lives that can undermine our well-being. Stress levels have increased between 10 and 30% over the last 30 years. According to the World Health Organization, stress is the #1 health epidemic of the 21st century. The number of people suffering from depression in the United States has also risen dramatically. The use of antidepressants rose 400% between 1988 and 2008. The suicide rate in 2016 reached its highest point in almost 30 years, with an increase for middle-aged adults of 40% since 1999. So what's happening? As I mentioned, our minds are pretty much the same as the minds of our hunter and gatherer ancestors. But look at how different the world is that we live in. There are 2 particular characteristics of our mind that can make living in the modern world especially challenging. One is our negativity bias, and the other is our wandering mind. Our minds have a survival instinct to constantly be on the lookout for potential threats or problems. Now, this was critical for helping our ancestors to stay alive. They had to be vigilant in order to notice the saber-toothed tiger crouching in the bushes. But after fighting or running away from the tiger, they were able to go back to calmly looking for food. Their bodies returned to a state of rest and renewal. It's actually very similar to the gazelles you see on the National Geographic shows. They run as fast as they can to get away from the lion. But as soon as they're safe, they calmly go back to grazing, like nothing ever happened. Today, we face far fewer real dangers than our ancestors did, yet our brains perceive deadlines and emails that might bring bad news as potential threats. This keeps us in a constant state of alert. We never go back to grazing. Our bodies rarely have a chance for rest and renewal, which can lead to chronic stress that hurts our physical and psychological well-being. In addition to our negativity bias, our minds wander about half of the time. And this ability to think about the past and the future is what makes us human. It allows us to learn from our mistakes and to make plans. But it's also the source of much of our unhappiness. Because of our negativity bias, when our minds wander, they often turn to ruminating about something bad that happened in the past or worrying about something that might go wrong in the future. So the features of our brains that evolved to help us survive can also cause us to suffer. And as I mentioned, our modern, fast-paced world makes things even worse. The distraction of constant notifications from our smartphones is like cocaine for our naturally wandering minds. And our negativity bias keeps us on edge, just waiting to receive bad news from somewhere. But there is good news. Research in positive psychology and neuroscience shows that we have the power to boost our own well-being. Much of our well-being depends on our thoughts and actions, so we can learn ways of thinking and acting that are good for our well-being. For years, scientists believed the structure of our brains became fixed once we reached adulthood. They thought our brain was pliable when we were born, but hardened over time, like plaster. More recent scientific discoveries have found that the brain can change its structure and patterns of activity throughout our lifetime. Researchers call this neuroplasticity. One of the early studies that discovered neuroplasticity was done with taxi drivers in London. Anyone who wants to become a taxi driver there has to memorize a complete map of London streets. It often takes years of study to pass the exam. Research shows that the gray matter of the hippocampus, the area in the brain associated with spatial awareness and memory, is significantly thicker in London cabbies. A similar study of violinists found that the part of the brain associated with the motor movement of the left hand is more developed in their brains. We now know that our brains are rewired in response to our thoughts and experiences. When we focus on something, neurons fire together in our brain. When neurons fire over and over again, the neural connection becomes stronger, which means they'll be more likely to fire together in the future. The same thing happens in your brain when you learn to play a musical instrument or a sport. Playing the piano is a good example. The first time you try to play, your brain has to work really hard to read the notes and find them on the piano and move your fingers to the right keys in the right order. But as you practice, those neural circuits associated with reading the music and playing the notes fire over and over again. Eventually, the process becomes automatic, making it possible to play more and more difficult music. In a similar manner, the more frequently you think in a certain way, be it positive or negative, the more you hardwire that pattern, so it eventually becomes your default way of thinking. Those thoughts will arise more quickly in your mind than others. Whatever you frequently think or do becomes a habit in your mind. What you practice grows stronger. The more you practice feeling compassion or focusing your attention, the easier it becomes to feel kindness towards others or to concentrate. By shifting your thoughts and behavior, you can activate and strengthen new neural connections. And doing this over time will help you to build greater well-being. Now, you may have noticed that I began this lecture talking about the well-being of your employees, but now I'm talking about you, the business leader. Why this shift? It's because your employees' well-being depends on you. You directly influence the experience employees have at work, and you'll be in a better position to help them if you yourself are thriving. A survey by the American Psychological Association concluded that leader support was critical for workplace well-being. Results showed that 73% of employees with leaders who were committed to well-being initiatives said their organization's employees were thriving, versus only 11% of employees with leaders who were not supportive. Yet despite the importance of leader support, only 40% reported having a leader who was involved in and committed to employee well-being. Beyond your support and commitment to employee well-being, your efforts towards improving your own well-being influence those around you. Gallup researchers measured the well-being of 1,740 team members and their leaders in 3 6-month intervals. Results showed that when the leader was thriving, his or her direct reports were 15% more likely to be thriving 6 months later. Leadership sets the tone for almost everything in a work environment, including well-being. Too often, employee wellness programs are relegated to the HR department or maybe a subcommittee somewhere within the organization. If you're seeking a workplace that thrives, that's the wrong approach. As we'll see time and time again in this course, a thriving workplace starts with a thriving leader. If you're thriving, you'll have more energy, creativity, and resilience to better serve your team. Putting your oxygen mask on first will free you to focus on their needs. You can then create experiences for and direct the attention of your employees in ways that will increase their well-being. So now that we know what thriving means in general, let's look more closely at thriving in the context of the workplace. As the phrase, "Thank God it's Friday," suggests, the workplace can pose unique challenges to our sense of well-being. Heavy workloads, long hours, tight deadlines, a lack of control, a lack of meaning, and incivility can all have negative impacts on well-being. Research shows that almost 40% of employees suffer from stress at work. In one survey, 7% of people reported being hospitalized because of workplace stress. Many employees aren't thriving because they're too focused on surviving the pressures they encounter at work each day. Jeffrey Pfeffer, a professor of organizational behavior at Stanford, has published a book entitled "Dying for a Paycheck." In it, he discusses many of the ills of the modern workplace and argues that they can be life-threatening. He explains how the biggest source of stress is the workplace, and that stress is responsible for much of the chronic disease from which so many Americans suffer. Pfeffer estimates that job stress may cause as many as 120,000 deaths each year. He believes the environment we work in is as important as the one we live in. So we should hold organizations accountable not just for the impact they have on the physical environment, but also for the impact they have on the human beings who work for them. His book is an urgent call for companies to focus on workplace well-being. Now, stress at work doesn't just harm employees, it can also hurt company performance by contributing to a lack of engagement. Research by the Gallup organization shows that around 70% of U.S. employees are not engaged. Disengagement is associated with higher absenteeism and turnover, more accidents, and lower productivity. It's estimated to cost the U.S. economy between $450 billion and $550 billion each year. As an organizational psychologist, I've spent much of my career doing research on how to improve employee engagement and performance. I finished my PhD in industrial organizational psychology several years before the field of positive psychology came into existence. But when I started learning about the research that was being done, I became convinced that it was the key to success for employees and organizations. I immediately refocused my teaching and my research to apply the science of well-being to the workplace. For the past decade, I've taught leaders how to create more positive and meaningful work environments where employees can thrive. Many researchers are studying the impact of applying positive psychology in the workplace, and the benefits are undeniable. Employees who experience greater well-being at work are more engaged, more productive, more creative, more resilient, more loyal, and healthier. Researcher Thomas Wright has concluded from his studies that the psychological well-being of employees accounts for 10 to 25% of their job performance. Author and happiness researcher Sean Aker believes having a positive workforce is the greatest competitive advantage in the modern economy. In one study, researchers measured the well-being of 11,700 employees in a Fortune 100 finance company. A year later, they measured productivity, retention, and healthcare costs. They found a significant relationship between well-being and all three of these business outcomes. Higher employee well-being was associated with lower healthcare costs, higher productivity, and higher retention rates. Another large study of 6 organizations from 6 different industries found that white-collar employees who were thriving performed more than 16% better than those who were not thriving. And the difference for blue-collar employees was even more dramatic. Those who were thriving performed 27% better than those who weren't. Employees who were thriving were also 32% more committed, 72% more satisfied with their jobs, and experienced 1.25 times less burnout. The O.C. Tanner Institute surveyed over 2,000 employees from around the world to ask about their well-being and other work outcomes. Here's what they found when comparing employees with high well-being to those with low well-being. Productivity was nearly 20% higher. Those with high well-being reported producing 83% of their maximum potential work output, while those with low well-being produced only 64%. Job satisfaction was double. 89% of employees with high well-being said they were satisfied with their jobs, versus 44% with low well-being. Retention was also influenced by well-being. Employees with high well-being planned to stay at their organization 2 years longer than those with low well-being. The benefits of employee well-being are so powerful that researchers have been inspired to create centers that focus on applying the science of well-being in the workplace. A group of scientists created the Center for Positive Organizations at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. They're working to advance what they call positive organizational scholarship. Their mission is to inspire and enable leaders to build high-performing organizations that bring out the best in people. Scientists at the center pursue research in the areas of culture, meaning and purpose, resilience, and positive relationships in organizations. They're focusing on identifying positive characteristics that lead to exceptional individual and organizational performance. Another group of researchers, led by Fred Luthens at the University of Nebraska, has created what they refer to as positive organizational behavior, which integrates positive psychology into organizational settings. Their research has identified 4 key components of positive organizational behavior: self-efficacy, optimism, hope, and resilience. They have developed an intervention to build these 4 strengths in employees, and results show that the intervention increases job performance, job satisfaction, and organizational commitment. The Gallup organization has a strengths-based consulting practice that promotes the assessment and development of employee strengths. The shift away from a focus on what's wrong with employees and trying to fix their weaknesses to a focus on what employees do well and giving them the opportunity to do more of that represents a positive approach to the workplace. So why this explosion of research and resources being devoted to well-being in the workplace? Well, companies are beginning to recognize that focusing on employee well-being can be a smart financial move. Research shows a clear link between businesses that invest in their employees' well-being and the bottom line. One study revealed that revenues for companies listed among Forbes' 100 best companies to work for increased by an average of 22% in 1 year. Other studies have tracked companies in the 100 best list for several years and found that their returns were higher than the S&P 500, many years by a ratio of nearly 2 to 1. Jerome Dodson, president of Parnassus Investments, was so convinced that companies focusing on employee experience would show excellent investment returns that he started the Parnassus Endeavor Fund. It's a mutual fund that invests exclusively in large American firms proven to have outstanding workplaces. And guess what? The Endeavor Fund is the company's top performing fund. The data couldn't be more convincing. Well-being in the workplace, your own and your employees, can be a critical competitive factor, reducing costs associated with high turnover and employee health care, increasing employee productivity and innovation, and even impacting customer satisfaction. It's a smart move. It's also an ethical one. By investing in workplace well-being, you're offering your employees less stressful, more meaningful lives. Lives that are richer and longer, happier and healthier. It's a win-win for everyone, your business, your employees, and yourself. And there's more good news. Fostering well-being among your employees isn't that hard, and in most cases, it doesn't cost anything either. All it takes is learning what matters for well-being, and then creating an environment where people experience those things. That's what this course is all about. So let's get started.